Hey everybody, welcome to the program. This is the Otherppl show. I'm Brad Listi in Los Angeles, and it is Friday, so it is time for another flashback episode. Today, I'm going to be digging into the archives and sharing with you an outtake from episode 257, my conversation with author Natalie Baszile. It first aired on March 5th, 2014. Natalie Baszile is the author of the novel Queen Sugar, which was named one of the San Francisco Chronicle's best books of 2014 and was nominated for an NAACP Image Award. Queen Sugar was later adapted for television by the Oprah Winfrey Network and director Ava DuVernay to considerable acclaim. Natalie Baszile is also the author of a work of nonfiction and anthology entitled We Are Each Other's Harvest, celebrating African-American farmers, land, and legacy. So my outtake from episode 257 and my conversation with Natalie Baszile is coming up momentarily. A quick reminder before we begin to please sign up for my weekly newsletter. I would love it if you did so. Just go over to otherppl.com or bradlisti.com and sign up. The newsletter goes out once a week. I let you know about the latest episodes of the show. I also share links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. So sign up if that sounds good. You can also join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep the show going. Get yourself some merchandise. And I think that's it. Oh, a book club subscription. There's all sorts of stuff over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Today's episode is brought to you by Abrams Books, publisher of Idlewild, the darkly funny debut novel by James Frankie Thomas. It is set at a Quaker high school in Lower Manhattan. Idlewild is a campus novel. It's a book about a complicated relationship, and it takes a very fresh angle on queer and trans identity. Idlewild is the official September pick of the Otherppl book club. You can sign up, by the way, over at otherppl.com if you want to join the book club. Idlewild nails the heartbreak of being a theater kid and the humiliation of growing up. That's Idlewild, the debut novel by James Frankie Thomas, available now everywhere books are sold from Abrams Books. All right, so let's get to today's flashback to episode 257, my conversation with Natalie Baszile, author of the novel Queen Sugar. This episode first aired on March 5th, 2014. A reminder that the full episode is available in the feed. All episodes of this program are available to listeners. They are in the feed. So if you like what you hear in this flashback and you want to go in for the full conversation, just look for episode 257. Have at it. All right? So here we go. Let's do it. Today's flashback, my conversation with Natalie Baszile.
I went to school, I went to Berkeley, and I was an English major and loved it. And actually had a professor, Charles Muscatine, whose writing class I took, and I loved it. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do, but frankly, I was just too afraid. And so I graduated from Cal in '88 and went back to Los Angeles. And for 11 years worked in a business that my dad had started, selling aluminum to the aerospace and aircraft industry. And when I tell you it was soul killing, I cannot even describe how unhappy I was. But I stuck around for 11 years, and I would come home in the evenings and I would write. I would write on the weekends, do that whole thing. But I just couldn't muster the courage. And so I remember sitting at my desk, flipping through my desk calendar, because I was in sales, right? And I was flipping through this calendar, and all of a sudden I realized, holy shit, I've been here for 11 years. And on one hand, those 11 years had just dragged. But on the other hand, they had flown by. And I realized, if I don't do something soon, I'm going to look up and another 11 years will have passed. My dad will be ready to retire. He'll be thinking about that, and he'll look to me to take on this business. And I'll do it, but I'll hate myself for it. and one day I will wake up and I won't care. And I thought, I can't do that to him, and I can't do that to myself. So I quit. And
so how did that moment go? How did that moment go? Where you because I know, like, a lot of times parents, especially parents who have built up a business, that there's the natural impulse to want to, like, pass it on.
Oh yeah.
So was that a dicey conversation when you finally broke the news to him?
Well, I'll tell you this. I actually had that conversation twice. I had that conversation once in like 1990 to 1992 when I went into my dad's office and said, Dad, I'm really not happy. I really want to be a writer. I'm going to go back to grad school in English. And his response was, why would you go back in English? Why not go back and get an MBA? And I said, because that's really what I don't want an MBA. I don't want to be in business. So I actually went back the first time and got a master's in Afro-American Studies with a concentration in literature, thinking that I was going to go on and get a PhD and, be an academic. But my mother lured me back. I don't blame her, but, she like raised my salary just enough for me to want to stay. And besides, I chickened out.
Right.
So I stayed again until I was so miserable. We all were so miserable. I admit, I just wasn't happy there. And I'm sure I was, not a pleasant person to work with. And so when I finally flipped through that desk calendar that day and realized it had been, 11 years and I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, that's when I just went into my dad's office and said, I just can't do this anymore. And by that time, Brad, I think he was ready to see me go.
Yeah.
He was ready. He understood that I, had tried to do this thing and wasn't happy, and he released me and I released myself, and that was it. So, it took two bites at the apple before I could actually say, I can't do it.
Well, and it's not like you didn't give it a fair shot. I mean, 11 years.
That's kind of what I figured.
That's a good sample. So, but at least he was. So the relationship is good with your folks. Like that didn't like rupture anything. They understood to a degree.
They understood. Yeah. By the time I left, they understood, and they were happy for me.
And you're from LA?
Originally from LA. Yeah.
Okay. What part? I live down here. So where were you?
Then originally I'm from Palos Verdes, which is a suburb of LA.
Sure.
To be technical, but it's funny because I grew up in Palos Verdes, went to Cal, lived elsewhere for a few years, but then my husband and I moved back to Palos Verdes when our first daughter was born. And I hated it. I hated it because, it was suburban and, people were lovely and nice and kind and all this, but I needed writers. Right. I needed to be writers. So even though I lived in PV for 7 years, from 1996, 6 or 7 until 2003, all of my writing buddies were in LA. And so I lived in Palos Verdes, but I was constantly on the 405 or on the 110, driving into LA to go to workshops or, to have coffee with writing friends and all that. So I kind of straddled I straddled two lives for a long time.
So how did you meet these writing friends? I mean, did you have friends that you had grown up with or knew, or were you meeting people online at that point? I mean, I guess late 90s would have been the dawn of such a thing.
Yeah, okay, so in 1999, I went to Breadloaf for the first time.
Okay. And
just as a contributor. And on the last day I was there, I met some people had been telling me, oh, you've got to meet this woman, Dylan Landis. She's another writer. And we met literally in the last 30 minutes before we both headed back home. She and her husband were moving to LA from New York. And I was already in LA, so we exchanged email and contact information real fast. And when she moved, 3 weeks later, we met for coffee. And Dylan and I started going to Jim Caruso's writing workshop at Santa Monica College.
Sure, yeah.
You know that. And that just opened up a whole new world of writers. And so from that moment on, I started going to Jim's workshop every week, and, I met other writers, Mary Otis, and just some fabulous people who were all there in LA because, Jim's workshop is kind of, Mecca, right?
It's an institution.
It is. And so that's how I kind of, met all of my writer friends. It was at Jim's workshop.
Okay. So, was this UCLA time or was this post UCLA?
This was 2000. So it was after UCLA.
So you had your master's.
I had my master's. Yeah. And I was friends with, I'd stayed in touch with, the people who I met in that program, but they were all academics, so, they were going off and getting their, PhDs and, doing that kind of thing. And I was the one who kind of said, academic life is great, but I really want to write the book. So, and that's not to knock academia at all, but it just wasn't for me.
What about it? What about it? Just like you just felt like the work that you would have to do to be a teacher or, a tenured professor would have overshadowed the creative work that you wanted to do, or?
It was more just a feeling of frustration that writing academic analysis, kind of critiques of other people's critiques of the creative work was not my interest. I wanted to write the books. I didn't want to spend my life.
You're like, I want to be critiqued. I don't want to be critiquing people.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I hope that doesn't sound egocentric. It wasn't even about, or egotistical. It wasn't even about, having other people's attention on me. It was just more feeling like, I just want to be able to tell the stories. And that's what made me think academia, at least at that point in my life, was not for me.
Right. And in terms of like making a living, and because I think a lot of people in academia who write fiction or write creative nonfiction or whatever, it's sort of the day job, and it's always
you've got to do it.
Yeah, you've got to do it, and it's a job that insofar as a day job tends to mesh well with a writing life because you have kind of a flexible schedule or whatever. Whereas
right.
The job at the aluminum tubing company, probably you're not going to be able to like carve out like a 3-hour block in the middle of the day to go like muse, So,
right.
So how were you able to do the work, and then were you doing anything else? Was your husband working?
Yeah. Well, my husband is a lawyer. So, to some degree, we could afford for me to, write full time. But I'm not going to lie. That was terrifying to me because, I had grown up kind of, with the expectation that I would, kind of make my own way and, earn my own living. And so to have to be dependent upon someone else was really hard. It was really hard and, scary. It was scary too. So,
but also maybe motivating. I think if you have, because that's the thing about it is that to be a writer, you read enough literary history, and obviously there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. But
yeah.
You read literary biography, and there's almost always, what's the word? A benefactor, right? Is the a benefactor is the person who supports the artist, right?
Right. Right.
So whether it's like somebody married, like the writer married somebody who came from money, or the writer had like some wealthy, widower who decided to bankroll them, or somebody swooped in at the last minute. Like I'm thinking of Harper Lee. She had some wealthy friends in New York City who for Christmas one year gave her a year to write and just like paid her for her life. And that's how she wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. So, I don't know. I always like notice that. And then, for every one of those, there are others where it's like they lived in a cardboard box and wrote a masterpiece. So I'm not trying to say that it's always the case, but it's often the case where there's some good fortune somehow. And you have to have that support almost in order to get the work done. And that can be hard to reconcile for somebody who has that value of like self-reliance. And, it can be hard to kind of accept that support.
Yeah, it was. It was hard for me. And you mentioned motivation. I think it was a huge motivating factor because I felt like, okay, my husband is making certain sacrifices and, believes in this work, and I need to make this happen. I need to be at the desk every day. I need to do that in order to demonstrate to him, but also to me, that this was what I had committed to do. And it was an easy thing for me to do because since I'd spent 11 years doing something I was so unhappy at doing, it was a privilege for me to go and, report to the desk every day. But I did feel an obligation to, put in the time.
And to produce. And to
produce.
It's one thing to put in the time, but it's another thing to get like a saleable work done.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and what about motherhood? You mentioned that you had a child.
Well, yeah, we have 2 girls.
Okay.
And the funny thing is, when I started this book, my youngest daughter was 1 and my oldest daughter was 4. My oldest daughter is now a freshman in college, and my youngest daughter is a sophomore in high school. So that tells you how long it took to, give birth to this thing.
This makes me feel better because, I'm working I have a 3-year-old, and I'm working so slowly, and I'm not trying to blame anyone. I love having my daughter, but it's just it definitely makes time more difficult because it's the whole thing. You need that space. You need to have kind of nothing to do. And when you have young children, you almost never have nothing to do.
Exactly. Especially wait till you get to the age where your son is,
Or it's a girl. So.
Your daughter. Okay. Yeah. Is in any number of, summer day camps where every week, the schedule is different. Oh my God.
And the birthday parties. I can't deal. There's nothing more dreadful than a child's birthday party. My wife and I Rochambeau'd last week, and she had to go to Chuck E. Cheese. So
oh my God,
you just deal. It's part of this age range, and the thing about it is that as much as I'm down on it, my daughter, kids love birthday parties at this age.
Oh, they do.
They love it. So
yeah,
I can't be too big of a Scrooge. You got to go and let them sing and eat their cake. So.
Oh yeah. Well, can I just tell you the happiest? So it's the kiddie birthday parties and it's the kiddie movies that killed me. And I can remember having to take our kids to this movie where the dogs were talking. There were all of these dogs from outer space, and they were talking, and my husband and I looked at each other and just thought, we have hit a new low. And, and so every movie after that was measured. I think that movie was called Good Boy or something. And so the happiest day was the day when we could actually drop our kids off at those bad movies and they were old enough to go in with friends and see them by themselves, and we didn't have to sit through those anymore.
Right.
So you have a little ways to go.
I bottomed out. I think I hit rock. My personal rock bottom was Disney on Ice this past Christmas. I've never seen more sad, defeated adults in one space in my entire life. Just parents just slumped over in their seats. It was, but of course, it's the kids love it. But and I don't, because it's hard because I think people listening who don't have children can sometimes do an eye roll because people who have kids tend to talk about that a lot. But it's a real thing that writers come up against, or a lot of writers come up against, because it's bad enough to have a day job or need a day job to support your writing, but then you have kids and you've got to balance that. And the good news is that people find a way to do it.
That's right.
The bad news is that it really takes some hustle and maybe some low-grade amphetamines.
Yeah.
I mean, it's it can be an extraordinary push to get it all taken care of and taken care of well. So, I'm always curious how people do it. And it's nice to hear that it just took you a little bit longer than it might have otherwise. Yes.
Yeah, it did because, my feeling was also this. I felt like, okay, and I don't have any, it's not about being the perfect parent. It's not about that. But I did always think to myself, okay, I can always revise this book. I only have one shot with these kids. And so, that was also part of the struggle for me was, battling that internal desire to kind of slip away and, get back to the book, having to balance that against, okay, well, they really want my full attention for these, 20 minutes. Okay, I can give them that, And it was funny, I was talking to another friend of mine just last week, and he has, I think his son is 6, and he just kind of came out with a short story collection a little while ago, and he was saying that, so now all of the publicity stuff is over, and he's home, every day trying to write, but he's the primary, childcare person. And he was saying that right now he's starting to feel that pull, of really needing to get back to work and really needing to get back in the stories. And so he's trying to hold out, until summer vacation when he can, do that. So it's a constant struggle. Yeah. It's constant.
All right, everybody, there we have it. That was Natalie Baszile, my conversation with her in episode 257. It first aired on March 5th, 2014. Natalie Baszile is the author of the novel Queen Sugar and a work of nonfiction entitled We Are Each Other's Harvest. You can find out more at nataliebaszile.com. Follow her on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe to the Otherppl YouTube channel. Follow the show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. If you would like to listen to the full episode with Natalie Baszile, look for episode 257. It's in the feed. Have at it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Otherppl newsletter, my once-a-week newsletter. It is free. You can do that at otherppl.com or bradlisti.com. You can also join the Otherppl Patreon community at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. If you want to do me a quick favor, give this show a rating and review it if that is an option. Wherever you listen, it helps the show find new listeners. If you want some Otherppl apparel, a t-shirt or a sweatshirt, head on over to otherppl.com. Finally, I have a novel out. My latest novel is called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. It is available now in trade paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions. And I narrate the audiobook. So if you want me to read it to you, that is possible. Again, it is called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. All right, so coming up on Sunday, I will be in conversation with Mona Awad, author of the new novel, Rouge. Great conversation with Mona. Excited to share that one with you in just a couple of days. So